Welcome to the Wealth Setting Podcast. This is episode 483. Today is July 30th, 2025. I'm your host, John Pugliano. I'm also the founder and money manager at investablewealth.com. Well, I have a quick episode for you today, but listen up. I think what you're going to hear me say is much different than any of the coverage you're hearing right now about the trade deals that the U.S. has specifically made just recently with Europe and with Japan. And what I want to talk to you about is not the nitty-gritty details or which side's getting over on the other, but I want to reiterate that what we've just seen take place in the last week, especially with the abrupt signing of the trade deal from the EU, this is further confirmation that the long-term trend favors the convergence of industry and technology, specifically in the United States. But the bottom line, what we're witnessing is the continuation of a major shift, not only in global economics, but specifically in national defense strategy, where we've gone from the post-World War II era of strategic trade, which encouraged maximum globalization. We've now shifted to strategic competition, and that won't end globalization, but globalization as we've known it over the last 80 years has peaked. And we're going back to more of a pre-1990s polarized economy where individual countries will have to make a choice of whether they want to be on the United States side or the Chinese side. And that isn't as big of a deal as you hear the gloom and doom apocalyptic people preaching, because again, just going back 35 years or so, that's the way it was back then. That was the way it was through, the first half of my life. There was what was called the Western world or the free world, and there was the Soviet bloc or the communist world. There were two separate, distinct economic systems, and we're headed back in that direction now. The key point about what just happened last week with the confirmed trade deals now between Japan and the U.S. and the United States and the European Union, and you add on the UK, which was a deal, done a few weeks back. And that really solidifies all the key major economies that are going to be involved in this. Now you may say, well, what about Mexico and Canada and Brazil and India, et cetera, et cetera? Well, Canada and Mexico are going to follow along, as will other strategic places like Australia, simply for the fact that they have no other choice. Again, you're choosing sides here. And as much as people may love to hate the United States, when you look at which team you're going to join, for most countries, there really isn't an option. And again, this is what we saw play out last week. And you've been hearing the rhetoric from Europe about how they're going to retaliate, they're not going to make a deal, they're not going to let taxman tell them what to do. I mean, all the rhetoric on and on and on, and everything dragging out for weeks and months. And yet, last week, there was literally a snap decision made. And again, this is what I think is not being portrayed in the media. But if you go back and look at what happened last week, once the U.S. made the deal with Japan, the European Union, their delegates, were headed over to China for an EU-China summit, and this was supposedly to bring the two sides together. It was scheduled to be a 2-day summit, and it was abruptly stopped after the first day. The EU president came out of the gate punching and specifically said that there had to be a rebalance in the relationship between the European Union and China because they were at an inflection point that was no longer beneficial to the European Union's economy. She said that trade practices with China were unfair, the playing field wasn't equal, there wasn't equal access to markets, that China was overproducing, that the European Union was seeing significant damage to their economy collectively, and that just over the last 10 years, the trade deficit with China had more than doubled. And if that wasn't enough, she also brought up the fact that Europe was not happy with China's relationship and support of Russia's war in Ukraine. And she stood her ground. And President Xi on the Chinese side, he stood his ground. He told the EU that the time had come to make the right strategic choice, and that he was willing to enhance cooperation between the two economies, but he wasn't budging on his position, And as it turns out, the Europeans weren't budging on theirs. So that 2-day summit was abruptly canceled after 1 day, and immediately following that meeting, this is on Friday of last week, an impromptu meeting was scheduled with Trump while he was visiting Scotland. And so over the weekend on Sunday, again, this meeting put together very quickly, von der Leyen flies up to Scotland, meets with Tariff Man for less than an hour, and they come out with a total agreement on tariffs and investment in the United States. That turnaround is more important than all the specific details that people are trying to work out, because the details will get worked out. But the point is, the strategic shift, which again has been happening for the last 12 to 15 years, it is firmly in place now, and almost all the players that need to be lined up on either side are already in place, or de facto, they have no other place to go. And you may be saying, well, what about Brazil? What about India? Some of these other larger economies. Well, those economies, again, going back 35 years ago, either directly or implicitly weren't on the U.S.'s side anyways. Certainly not fully integrated to the Western economy. Go back and study Cold War history, and you'll see that the way the boundaries are being drawn and the alliances are being made, they're not so dissimilar from what they were prior to the collapse of the Soviet Union. Oh, we're calling things by different names. It's not the Soviet bloc anymore. It's the Chinese Communist Party. Or it's not the Third World, it's the Global South. But make no mistake about it. Most of the players today that are on one side or another were on that same side 35 years ago. And so the lines now have not only been drawn and the teams picked, but we are moving forward, and all of this emphasis on the shift in national security strategy from strategic trade to strategic competition strengthens and magnifies what I've been talking about, really going back since at least 2016, about more manufacturing and more energy use here in the United States. And while the media is squabbling about what's in these deals, what's out of the deals, what still needs to be done with Canada and Mexico, listen, ignore all that. Start focusing on what's happening in the United States right now with the next part of this plan, which is what's happening with deregulation. You're seeing that across the industrial sector. You're seeing it even with mundane industries like the railroads, and it's going to be magnified when it gets to the big tech companies. If you think the first half of 2025 has had some crazy twists and swings in the stock market, you haven't seen anything yet. Just wait until we get into 2026. Well, hey, until then, as always, this is John Pugliano wishing you the very best returns.